Welcome to the show, folks. I am your host, G.I. Wingnut. Welcome to the hangar. So, as you can see on the screen, I was asked a compound question, and this is what happened. Normally, I would put myself on camera because I do live streaming, but I'm really not up to it today. That said, I just want to let it be known from the get go that I grew up in the Assemblies of God Church in the 70s, and it was quite the ride. It's the World Assemblies of God, according to Wikipedia, and this is accurate. Uh, the World Assemblies of God, or AG Church, officially known as the World Assemblies of God Fellowship, is an international Pentecostal denomination, and we're going to get into that a lot deeper. But I want to get to what this compound question was all about. So, as a live streamer and a curious guy with a passion for history, for a while I've been snooping around looking at historical stuff, and I was running down some CIA history, at least according to what's available in the archives. And a buddy of mine that I do a lot of work with asked me this compound question. Have you ever really looked into the southern hemisphere and what they're doing down there? And maybe why they might be moving so many people into the northern hemisphere? We were kicking around thought experiments. Okay, that's where the whole question is coming from, just based upon what I was stumbling across. And we did the usual rabbit trail kind of stuff. Just looking at UNESCO sites and digging into history and different operations that happened. And I stumbled across quite a few resources, but this was the one that he expected me to stumble upon and get stuck on. But I fell into something on this one this last time around. And this has been a while back. Maybe a year and a half ago now. We're towards the end of April in 2024. So yeah, a year and a half. Yeah, about a year and a half ago. And we're gonna get to what I found. But anyway, Operation Condor, for those who may not be familiar with it, and this is coming from the National Archives at George Washington University. I'll try to get all the links put in the description below the video, or I may end up having to put them in a PDF file and post them on my community tab on YouTube. It depends on where else I post it, on whether or not I'll be able to get the links posted. I'm also on Rumble and Pilled. Anyway, so on March 6th, 2001, the New York Times reported the existence of a recently declassified State Department document revealing that the United States facilitated communications among South American intelligence chiefs who were working together to eliminate left wing opposition groups in their countries as part of a covert program known as Operation Condor. The document, a 1978 cable from Robert E. White, the U.S. ambassador to Paraguay, was discovered by Professor J. Patrice McSherry of Long Island University, who has published several articles on Condor. She called the cable, quote, another piece of increasingly weighting evidence suggesting the U.S. military and intelligence officials supported and collaborated with Condor as a secret partner or sponsor, end quote. I will tell you what, I don't do rabbit holes anymore, folks. I do data strip mines. All right, so y'all better buckle up because we're gonna be in for quite a ride. This is gonna be a run. This is something I've needed to do. Continuing with the article, in the cable, Ambassador White relates a conversation with General Alejandro Freitas Davalos. Please forgive my lack of Latin speech. My tongue is very American. Back to the article. Let me just start over. In the cable, Ambassador White relates a conversation with General Alejandro Freitas Davalos, Chief of Staff of Paraguay's Armed Forces, who told him that the South American intelligence chiefs involved in Condor, quote, keep in touch with each other through a U.S. communications installation in the Panama Canal Zone, which covers all of Latin America, end quote. I got to insert thought here because this is a piece of history that I will get back to. All right. I equate my work to trying to build a wireframe map of a dust bunny or trying to map slime mold. This is going to get deep. All right, so continuing. This installation is, quote, employed to coordinate intelligence information among the Southern Cone countries, end quote. White Rose, or White, whose message was sent to the Secretary of State, Cyrus Vance, is concerned that the United States connection to Condor might be revealed during the then ongoing investigation into the deaths of the former Chilean foreign minister Orlando Letelier and his American colleague Roni Moffat, who were killed by a car bomb in Washington, D.C. Quote, it would seem advisable, end quote, he suggests, continuing, quote, to review this arrangement to ensure that its continuation is in U.S. interest, end quote. Oh, boy, howdy. All right, I'm going to also let you know I'm an Air Force vet. And during my tour of duty in the early 80s, early to late 80s, my first permanent duty assignment was with the Air Force Weapons Lab at Kirtland Air Force Base as a supply guy ordering parts for engineers. And I had an electronics background. And so that allowed me to be able to speak engineers. So I understood some of the projects that we were working on that were attached to the Ronald Reagan Star Wars program. But that's a story for another show. Anyway, in America, in U.S. interest. All right, so the document was found among 16,000 state, CIA, White House, Defense and Justice Department records released last November on the Pinochet dictatorship in Chile and Washington's role in its violent coup that brought his military regime to power. The release was the fourth and final tranche of records released under the Clinton administration's special Chile declassification project. Oh, I missed that detail before. Okay, so yeah, put a pin in the Clinton administration because, yeah, anyway, you might as well just get you a couple of packs of index cards, a couple of skeins of yarn, and a big old box of thumbtacks. I'm just saying. This is going to get wild, folks. Continuing with the article. This document opens a Pandora's box of questions on the U.S. knowledge of and role in Operation Condor, end quote, says senior analyst Peter Kornblau, Director of National Security Archives, Chile Documentation Project. Yeah, anyway, the archive published a second document, a page from a CIA cable regarding Brazil's role in Operation Condor that Kornblau said contained information that could shed light on this issue. The undated page refers to Condortel, the quote, communications network established by the Condor countries, end quote. Kornblau pointed out that the entire next line was or has been censored by the CIA. The National Security Archive called the U.S. intelligence community, NSA, CIA, DIA, and other Defense Department bureaus at the U.S. Southern Command to fully divulge their files on communications assistance to the military regimes in the Southern Cone. Well, it was along this way that I stumbled across a bunch of information from Whitney Webb, and I will bring that information to light later. She does some fantastic work. But moving right along, because I got a lot to cover, and I want to kind of keep this relatively short. So, also coming from the National Archive, the lifting of Pinochet's immunity renews focus on Operation Condor. I am not going to deep dive into this article, but I do want to point out this little thing right here because the Maxwell affair is something that I am going to come back to later on. All right, this is where the Whitney Webb details come into play. But if you really want to look into her stuff, One Nation Under Blackmail, fantastic pair of books. Fantastic pair of books. But I'm digressing. So Chile and the United States. This is also coming from the National Security Archives over at George Washington University. Chile and the United States, declassified documents related to military coup, September 11th, 1973. September 11th. Interesting. I don't necessarily believe in signs, but I don't necessarily believe in coincidences either. Especially, yeah, anyway, moving right along. So, this gets Richard Nixon tangled up in the mess. There's a lot more to it. I'm not gonna really dive into it because I'm wanting to move on into what I stumbled upon. Again, I'm going to leave the links to all this stuff. If you want to go ahead and read it for yourself before I get back to it, please feel free to do it. Please check for yourself and question everything. And always, always be cautious of your resources. So, speaking of Whitney Webb, she brought to light this wonderful document, and I am not at all surprised because the idea behind Operation Condor was the quote unquote denazification of South America. And yeah, if YouTube doesn't like some of the words I use, I will go back and edit them and we'll figure it out. But anyway, I'm just using history here, folks. I'm using terminology from history. I'm a historian. Anyway, so CIA documents show UK, France, and West Germany wanted to bring Operation Condor to Europe. I'm not going to deep dive this article again. I will link it below. But there is I don't remember if it's this article or the previous one that brings in the Brazil connection. But this article was published April 17th, 2019, Santiago, Chile. A recently declassified CIA document has revealed that members of the intelligence agencies of France, the United Kingdom, and West Germany discussed how to establish, quote, an anti-subversive organization similar to, kill brackets, the CIA's Operation Condor, end quote, in their own countries. Oh, Lord have mercy. I don't even want to get into on Q thing yet. That's a whole nother deal. Personally, I think, and this is going to irritate some folks, I know, but then again, it might help others understand. But personally, I think that Q is just Operation Trust 2.0, or a reiteration of. We can dive into that some other time. But anyway, this is a channel that got me into the next phase of my research. Rare Earth. Now, I'm not a huge fan of all of his work, but he does do some great stuff. And you can see the title down there for yourself. Yeah, pause it if you need to. I'm not going to play any of this video, but he goes into a few names like Paul Schaefer and some things like Colonia Dignidad. And then he mentions somebody else, and I was like, wait a minute, who's William Branham? I've never heard of this guy before. Well, sure enough, I looked into Operation Condor plus William Branham, and that's where I stumbled into this stuff. Thank you, John Collins and Charles Paisley and the rest of the folks over there that work with John, help him out, all the background researchers that feed him information. They do some fantastic work over there, and it helped me untangle so much. But again, I'll leave links. Operation Condor was a United States backed political and terrorism campaign involving intelligence operations and the assassination of key political opponents in South America. I'm not going to deep dive into this too much, but because I got a couple of videos that I'm going to play from John, and I I need to share this Paul Schaefer guy. All right. Oh, and this is a fantastic book, Weaponized Religion by John Collins. Excellent read, deep research. Pardon me, and lots and lots of footnotes because, as he aptly points out, we have to document everything so that people can go for themselves and see for themselves what the historical facts are in the archives, so they can verify for themselves that we're not just pushing some sort of wackadoodle nonsense, that we're actually trying to correctly rewrite history based upon the facts at hand, based upon the documents in the archives. Anyway, footnotes, 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 annotation, context, context, context. I don't care if you're talking. I'm going to diverge for a second here. Yeah, I'm going to digress for a moment. I don't care if you're talking about biblical teachings or if you're talking about teachings from the Torah or the Quran or any of the New Age texts. Context, context, context. You can't understand anything just by pulling a thing out, which is why I study history from an anthropological point of view. When I look at history, I want to see what the people are doing. I want to see who they're connected to. I want to see how they're affecting others. Are they helping or are they hurting? Anyway, this has been up on the screen long enough that you've been able to read enough of it. I'm not going to dive into it. All right, but I do need to bring this up real quick before we move along because I mentioned having grown up at the Assemblies of God Church, and I've heard others mention this as well. And many of them may not be aware of the history behind the church and where it all got started. Again, I will leave links so you can go dive in for yourself. But the important facts are that the let's see, I'm missing a tab here, I think. But Assembly of God Church had splintered off from another denomination that was predominantly black, and it was a bunch of white guys. All right. What's crazy is that the Assembly of God Church was officially founded in 2000 or in 1914, and you'll notice this little passage down here. Here, I'll go ahead and make that bigger for you, and you can read it for yourself. All right. If you need to, pause it because I want to get into just briefly the fact that this is a hard fact. All right. Again, pause it if you need to read that. Nice and slow. All right. I've left it up there long enough. I'm moving right along. So let John Collins talk to you a bit about this Colonia Dignidad thing. I know that he will not mind me using his information. He's already told us to please share it out, and this is deeply works into what I'm talking about because this deals with government involvement within religion and how it's seeped in, and this definitely works into a lot of things that Laura over at Magical Mystery Church has been bringing up about things like, oh, I don't know, how Alice Bailey plays in to all this and how Alice Bailey plays into the New Apostolic Reformation and how this plays into the New Apostolic Reformation and how it has a history of leaving destruction behind it. Anyway, I'm getting fired up. So, John, please take it away.
Colonia Dignidad, or Dignity Colony, was a William Branham cult compound in Chile with a very interesting history. Shortly after William Branham established multiple offices in Germany, about the same time that message cult leader Jim Jones of People's Temple started spreading William Branham's apocalyptic fears and moved to South America for the first time, message cult leader Paul Schaefer moved to Chile and began setting up the commune. By 1963, 230 message believers had migrated to Colonia Dignidad. From there, the history became very dark and has been the subject matter of several movies and documentaries. The compound harbored Nazi leaders that were fleeing to South America, and Colonia Dignidad became known as the colony to fleeing Nazis. The CIA and Nazi hunter Simon Wiesenthal claimed to have evidence that Hitler's angel of death, Joseph Mengele, spent time in the message commune. Message believers in Colonia Dignidad began torturing and killing everyone from opponents of the current political regime to children who disobeyed Branham's cult rules. Worse, the message believers in Chile were manufacturing and stockpiling weapons of war. When the compound was raided, officials found surface-to-air missiles, rocket launchers, machine guns, submachine guns, hand and cluster grenades, rifles, anti-personnel mines, automatic pistols, and a large amount of ammunition. As the investigation continued, officials found sarin gas and learned that the message believers were manufacturing chemical and biological weapons. Also found were 500 files on people who had been assassinated in Chile, from political leaders to entertainers. One file had the name John F. Kennedy on it, and inside were 2 bullets of the same caliber that was used by Lee Harvey Oswald in the assassination of JFK. You can learn this and more on william-branham.org.
So, yeah, yeah, that Kennedy thing. So, we'll address that later, or better yet, go over to leaving the message and check out the work. There's a lot of information there. But see, He had to go and bring up that whole Jim Jones thing, didn't he? Of course he did. Here's why it's important, especially to me, but we'll get there. Yeah, we'll get there in a moment. So, Jim Jones, James Warren Jones, born 1931, died 1978, was a charismatic religious cult leader who, with his converts, performed mass self-delete in Jonestown, Guyana. And he started his career as a Methodist minister with a Pentecostal background, converted fully to Pentecostalism in the early 1950s. Shortly before forming People's Temple, Jones was officially ordained into William Branham's latter rain version of the message as a faith healer by Joseph Matson Bozay on the behalf of the Independent Assemblies of God, led by A.W. Rasmussen. Prior to his ordination, Jones preached at the message affiliated Laurel Street Tabernacle, dedicated by message promoter Roy W. Weed and supporter Lester Summerall. Yeah, Roy Weed. Hang on a second. I might have to put an edit in here. No. I will just, we need to put a pin in Roy Weed's name because, or you can check it out for yourself. But Roy Weed had a son named Doug Weed that got into some trouble over some campaign fundraising, trying to bring in Russian money into the Republican coffers for the Trump campaign. Again, I can do a whole show on that at another time, or you can go look it up yourself. But yeah, it gets ugly out here, folks. So I think it's the next clip I have lined up. Yeah, it's this clip. Brings me to a point of a video that I'm going to have to do later, and this is something I've kind of, this is a year that I picked up on because of something that Laura at Magical Mystery Church brought to my attention. And I was scanning through the book, the online book, and I stumbled on something. It was a really crazy control nexus point that happened in 1952. And this is just part of it. I'm working on doing a mini series about 1952. And because it's going to take at least 3 or 4 parts to cover all that. But anyway, let's let John tell us about Jim Jones and William Branham connecting in 1952.
Jim Jones of People's Temple was a leader in the latter rain version of William Branham's message cult following and worked closely with William Branham's close associate, Joseph Matson Bozay of the Philadelphia Church in Chicago. Jones was involved with the latter rain movement since its early beginnings in the United States in late 1949 or the early 1950s, but was not directly connected with William Branham until May 2, 1955. In a letter to William Branham, Joseph Matson Bozay introduced Jim Jones to William Branham as a quote-unquote bosom friend and esteemed servant of God. Bozay told Branham that he would love the spirit that is in Brother Jones and the church he pastors. The connection between William Branham and Jim Jones would continue to strengthen until Jones would eventually rise to leader in Branham's cult, hosting multiple conventions, some of which were in other states. You can learn this and more on william-branham.org.
Again, thank you, John. And that reminded me of something. Let me go back over here a second. And we'll go to the people's list. And he said Joseph Matson Bozay, and that reminded me about Billy Graham. And in 1952, as William Branham's popularity was in strong decline and Joseph Matson Bozay of Chicago. Oh, yeah, Chicago. Um, John Alexander Dowie. Yeah, anyway, Joseph Matson Bozay of Chicago was working to lift Branham up. Bozay tried to connect William Branham to Billy Graham in a personal meeting with Graham. Interestingly, Billy Graham spoke at People's Temple in July of 1955, shortly before Jim Jones became the leader of Branham's Message Cult of Personality. So that gets me over to this particularly impactful incident. Yeah. So November 18th, 1978, I would have been 14 years old. And I was eyeballs deep, folks, in the Assemblies of God Church. Royal Rangers. And I was deep. Looking back on it, I've still got a lot yet to untangle. There was a lot of Ken Copeland, Pat Robertson, Hal Lindsey, just Jimmy Swaggart, that whole gang back then. And we're gonna get to that later on down the road, because it took me a lot to untwist a lot of this stuff that got drilled into my head. Yeah, I went off. I bought that Christian nationalist ideology. I went off to the military. I did my civic duty. Yes, I'm an Air Force vet. Um, and I did good studying as a businessman, and I worked well as a businessman. Here, let me take that off the screen. I did good as a businessman. Um, I was invited to join into politics at one point, but I was not willing to support the full agenda that they wanted me to promote. So as much as I wanted to, I chose to take my life in a different direction. So yeah, I skipped on that. And when it came to being a preacher, I did a hard pass on that. Yeah, anyway. There's a whole lot more to that story. But there's this to add to the wave of destruction. This thing that happened a little over a year ago. And as soon as I saw it happen, it reminded me of Jonestown. And come to find out, Paul McKenzie, the leader of this, what do you call it? The Good Message International Ministry or something. I tell you what, anytime I see international in a name, or of a quote unquote religious group, a cult, is where my brain goes. International, or Living Word, or bells and whistles start going off, man. It gets bad quick. Anyway, if you really need to read more on that, or if you really need to know more on that, go right ahead, do some research. There's some more videos on it over there on Leaving the Message. There's just so much to unwind here, folks. Oh yeah. Laura uncovered a document. Laura over there at Magical Mystery Church uncovered a document, or became aware of and did a video on a document. Yeah, I'll do a post, and I'll throw it up here on the screen. But yeah, she run across a document that I'm going to dive into, and by now it'll be on the screen. I already knew about the CIA controlling the media, Operation Mockingbird. If you haven't heard of it, go look it up. MK Ultra, if you haven't heard of it, I'm going to readdress that subject later, and I'm going to show its parallels. I mean, immediate parallels to Scientology. Yeah, my thing, is digging up these bizarre and wacky and unheard of government connections. I mean, if you haven't heard of who the finders were, or the fact that they still exist, or at least some of the people that were key members of it still exist and they're still running around, and how it's connected to the government and was covered up, go check it out. Better bring a barf bag. It's bad. Comparative cult studies and government connections. That's what I do. And it's untangled so much for me. Anyway, I put together a bit of an outro to pay some tribute to some folks that have helped me out with untangling some things and figuring some stuff out. Please go look up their websites or go look up their channels on YouTube or wherever else you might be able to find them. I'm going to be focusing this particular project on YouTube instead of elsewhere, although I will be putting it elsewhere. Anyway, folks, be cautious about the sources you utilize, and be willing to use multiple resources. And do not be afraid to accept facts that may challenge your very thinking. The best way to prove yourself right is to try to prove yourself wrong. Anyway, yeah. See you in the next one, folks.